Hello everyone. I am Dr. Berk. Our topic is sexual communication. This issue of sexual communication is very important, especially for those who have a partner or are married, and those who have a strong bond between partners at work. I included a 1.5-page section of sexual information in my book, but this will have a special book. I've already started writing it. This is something of that book. We can consider it as a chronology. Of course, in order to have an idea about a subject, you need to know that subject in order to talk about it. That's why you can read books, watch videos, and learn about it. Now, why is sexual communication important? What was the main issue in sexuality? You know, we were always saying this like a slogan. To take pleasure, to give pleasure, but everyone is responsible for their own satisfaction. Now, in order to give pleasure to the other person, you need to get to know the other person in general and in particular. What does that mean? In other words, women like their breasts, for example. This is general information, this is sexual information. But there is also special information. So your partner is marriage, you don't know if he likes to be touched on his chest, kissed, trusted, licked, whatever. You can only find out about it by asking him. Therefore, it is necessary to communicate on this issue. Considering that 40% of the relationship is transparency, the better this lust is, the more harmonious it is, the better the relationship will be. For him, sexual communication is important. Now there are very important issues to be considered in sexual communication. Let me go through them in a nutshell. For one thing, you won't lose what you have. So that's the most important issue. There will be no non-sexual talk and no retrospective questions. In other words, the subject should not start with sexuality and come to general partner problems or marriage problems. Our topic is only sexuality, and please don't ask retrospective questions. I see on some websites that the questions that need to be talked about between partners, that need to be asked. Tell me about the best sexual experience you've had in the past. So it doesn't make much sense. The past is the past. We need to look ahead. So let's not ask retrospective questions here, please. Let's have a positive conversation. There has to be a middle ground. There always has to be a middle ground. Words such as don't judge, never shouldn't be too many. Because these are out of the positive. Beliefs, cultures and traditions need to be taken into account. Everyone has a way of upbringing, everyone has a belief, everyone has a general culture, so these are also important. If problems are to be put on the table, which they should be, it should be done last. In other words, all conversations should be made and done last so that the problem in the middle is solved. If you talk about the problem from the beginning, then some problems will arise. Please, let's pay special attention to these. Now, what should the questions include? This can also go systematically. It can be complicated, but at the end of the day, there is an environment, there is space, there is time, there is frequency, there is visuality, there is smell, etc. All of these are in sexuality. Therefore, it is necessary to talk about everything that happens in sexuality one by one. And then there are the direct questions. Also, as I said last time, we need to talk about the problems. Now, if I were a man, sometimes they ask, sir, that is, if you, as a man, have to ask a woman first, if the bond between me is strong, that is, I would not get up and ask a question to someone I have been with for 3 days, but if the bond between me is strong, if you are married, etc. If you have a partner, if I had the right to ask a single question, as a man, I would ask the woman this: how do you get an orgasm? Because that's where everything comes from. The 70% of women we know have a vaginal plus clitoral orgasm. In other words, it asks for a stimulus to my clitoris during intercourse with the vagina. 20% can have a vaginal orgasm only gradually, and 10% are cultural. This is very important because what was our topic was to take pleasure and give pleasure. Now, in order for a woman to reach orgasm, or for a person to reach orgasm, she needs to feel pleasure. It's very important to know how you get pleasure, how you orgasm, it's the main thing. I think this is the first question you should ask if you are married. After that, we can move on to other questions or ask them later. There are questions of the setting. These questions of environment and space are very important. Reason? Because if you remember, I made a video before. The top 10 fantasies of women and men. See, women's top 3 fantasies were always about setting, space, romance, etc. So this is very important for women. So please ask these questions. In other words, women and men and women, ask. So, for example, is there a place you want to choose at home? What should your preferred environment look like? So maybe lighting a candle can make your partner feel more pleasure. It's a simple case. The second is the frequency of time. In other words, of course, depending on the situation in the morning, noon, evening, sometimes there are children and so on, and a decision has to be made. Sometimes, yes, you may always want to have sexual intercourse in the morning, but if the environment is not suitable, then the time and place should be determined. These can be asked. The question of how often to do it is important. Because sometimes one of the partners may ask for 3 days a week, for example, and the other may ask for it once a month. Look, I repeat, it is necessary to find a middle ground here without getting strange, without starting a fight, without arguing. In other words, those who want a lot should approach the less, and those who want less should approach the many. But you know, if one partner wants it every day and the other wants it once a month, there is not much middle ground. But we need to talk about it sincerely. It doesn't matter how often you do it. It's not the quality that counts, it's the quantity. It's not quantity, it's quality. So the quality of the relationship is important. Some do it once a month, they are happy. As I said, if you are happy with the frequency of your relationship, you do not need to change it, but if someone is hiding something inside, they need to express it, and this needs to be talked about. The issue of visuality is important. There is visuality in the relationship, from close to watching things and so on. I think one of the most important critical questions here may be the question of where is the place in my body that turns you on. Because both sides know this, it can be played on in terms of giving pleasure. This is important. Here's the dressing up of women. For example, the man likes to wear garters. You know, somehow this subject has not been mentioned, he has not said it. This can be said on this occasion. Watching erotic movies and so on can also be asked. I don't go into too much detail about them. Hearing and speaking are important. During intercourse, some want to talk a lot. I mean, you know, he wants to say some sexual, fabulous words, slang words. Or to be told words that induce him. Some don't. This also needs to be discussed. But again, the question is there a word, a voice, a speech that turns you on when you're making love? This needs to be asked. Smell is very important. Here is bad breath, the smell of sweat, perfume, room odor. For example, I always say to men, choose the perfume that your wives like, that turns your wives on, or that your wives like. It's not what you want, or it's not what someone else wants. It may smell good to the whole world, but if your spouse or partner doesn't like it very much, it doesn't make sense because you are with your partner. So that's important, and that's the smell. This bad breath and sweat odor thing is important, we need to talk about it seriously. It should not be strange in any way, it should not be taken on such a task. My mouth stinks a little at work, you can say that I am bothered by it. This is a very normal thing. The other party should not be offended by this. What's the point? To be happier, that is, to be happier after all. The issue of touch is important. Here, we should not start this touching business with negative sentences. I mean, where's the place you don't want me to touch? I would never touch it. There is no such thing. It might be something I prefer less, but where are the places you want me to touch? If I had only one touch, where would you want me to touch? And it's very important to describe it. I mean, for example, I want my neck to be touched, but how about your neck? By squeezing? By touch? After that, by hitting like this? And he has to say what happened. For him, the word describe is very important. Here you can. Kissing is important. How to kiss. Some want to kiss the madman, some with their lips, and so on. And you can talk about it among yourselves. The position is very important. Some positions can turn some people on much more during the relationship. These also need to be known. In other words, a man should know which food he likes the most, as well as in which position he likes it the most. Is there anything you'd like to try? These things can be talked about. The most difficult, very undesirable or less desirable positions can be discussed. Positions that I don't like to do very much can be discussed. Oral sex, anal sex, etc. Masturbation issues need to be talked about. Here's what you think about oral sex. What do you think about anal sex? Oral sex, is there anything you want from me? This is also important. Because if your partner, for example, only has clitoral orgasms, he will be able to reach orgasm in oral sex. Then he will describe it to you. Do this and that, or during masturbation. I also made a video about it. Here is a video on how to do a clitoral massage. You can watch it. The same goes for women. That is, during oral sex, ask your partner how the penis should be done at work or how you should do it. I mean, sometimes I ask, how should I have oral sex? You will do as your partner wants. It's not a lot to give a general information, since after all, it is the one you will give pleasure. Sexual toys can be preferred. I know that later in the marriage or later in the relationship, it brings excitement, as long as it's used correctly, of course. We also have a video about them, you can watch them. When, where, how we should use sexual toys, how we use them will cause us problems, how we use them will create something for us. For example, vaginal stimulation, during vaginal intercourse, you know that 70% of women were like this. I think sexual toys are important for women. For example, during vaginal intercourse, a tiny 100-pound device that vibrates a small vibration to the clitoris can facilitate orgasm during vaginal stimulation. These can be tried. It's not always the thing to do, but it can be tried and bring excitement to the relationship. These things can be talked about. It may be on other issues. Another situation is direct questions. So I think these are questions like, how do you get an orgasm in the first vaginal intercourse? To increase the size of the relationship a little more, to make sex better, to get to know each other a little bit, to increase this little dimension, here are the things that he doesn't want me to do when we make love. Do I have a fantasy? What is my favorite form of ejaculation? My favorite sex in his life, for example, we will not lose what we have mutually. What do we love very much? What we like less, what we do very well, this should always be talked about. The things that make it easier or harder for me to have an orgasm can give much better results if these are discussed. Problems should always be talked about last, but they should always be talked about. Sexual reluctance, inability to orgasm, especially in women, this is very much. Pain and ache in intercourse are also more common in women. This should not be pain or pain in the relationship. Something that brings pleasure to the relationship. It has to be a pleasure from start to finish. Premature ejaculation, which is the case in most men, can be talked about. Erectile dysfunction can be discussed. Of course, these should not be talked about. So, for example, if there is a conversation that we have premature ejaculation, what can be done about it? What can be the solution to it? What can we do about it? You know, while the problems are expressed, they should also talk about the solutions. Of course, you won't be able to figure out most things on your own. You need to get some help. But while getting this help, your partner's moral support for you will be very important. That's why problems should always be left to the end. Yes, that's what I'm going to talk about in general. You need to ask these questions to each other. You may be embarrassed, okay, it could be in marriage with your partner, cultural upbringing, etc. Write them down on a piece of paper. That's what I make some people do. Write these questions on A4 paper. Write down their answers as well. And then you do H9. The event ends. After that, you can talk about it. You can't talk. I don't know about him. But in the end, if you want to be happier with your partner, these questions have to be answered. And these questions should be answered as reasonably, logically, positively as possible. Thank you.